All right. Today we're joined by Oli Steadman, the bass player of the band Stornoway, based in the UK. Ollie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Royce. It's great to be here. Thanks for reaching out. It's a pleasure to meet you and get talking. Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Before we dive into today's topic of your song, "Watching Birds," I first want to briefly talk about how you were actually went bird watching last week. Would you mind talking about that experience a little bit?
That's right. Yeah. When we got in touch, your message reached me over the ocean in the Scilly Isles where I was, and that is a kind of really magical place in so many senses. It's off the coast of Cornwall, which is the southern westernmost point of the UK. And you when you get to Penzance, which is the last town on the UK mainland, you have to catch a 3 or 4 hour ferry over to the Scilly Isles. And the whole conservation project that they're doing there at the moment is really incredible, such that on the ferry over for the 3 or 4 hours, we were counting Manx shearwaters, which is a bird that I've always wanted to see and hear. So we were counting those, and then as we arrived on the first island and then had to catch the boat to the smaller islands, we were seeing all sorts of different species, the cormorants, again, that I don't tend to see very often. And it was a week, maybe 10 days actually, of counting and interacting with bird life there. And then the ferry home was even better because we saw dolphins jumping out of the water. So it was a very wildlife-filled, inspirational kind of journey.
It's awesome. Kind of transitioning from there, I know that I've been in the week that I've been kind of listening to like your records and stuff like that. I can definitely feel that inspiration of like the environment you're kind of around. Like your music has this very fun, playful energy to it. And I was just wondering if maybe you could kind of speak to on how the music that you've created has been infused with like the culture surrounding you and how that kind of plays a part into it. Would you say that does at any point?
It, yeah, yeah. I mean, we've always had this word associated with us, which is folk, as in the folk music genres. And we've always been kind of flattered to receive that label because even though we never set out to be a folk band that tells the stories of cultures and groups of people, we're more like a conservation, nature-inspired band.
Mm.
Um, when you think about how people everywhere do kind of interface with nature and it supports their mental well-being and enables them to go out and have adventures. Um, being of the animals and of the plants is a kind of being of the people as well. So we're kind of a eco-folk, maybe that would be a good way of describing it. And all our songs are inspired by the interactivity of nature with humanity, but specifically with human emotions and minds. My favorite is one of our oldest tracks, "We Are the Battery Human," and that's all about connecting people back to the great outdoors so that they don't stay stuck inside and they get out and hopefully when people are listening to us talking here, they might be doing it on whilst on a hike with their headphones in. Or if they're watching a screen, it's not for their whole day. They're just taking a little time on the screen and then spending most of their time outdoors. That's the Stornoway vision of the future, is people getting outdoors.
That's awesome. I love that connection you made specifically between folk music and then kind of bringing it into the present day and how, like you've said, it's like an eco folk band. Um, that connection I think is really interesting to me of how you're using kind of those old traditional styles and ways of storytelling and kind of bringing it into the future and showing it to like the next generation as well. So that was really awesome. I love that point you made. From there, now I guess we can kind of start talking about the main subject of today. Your track, "Watching Birds" from your first record, which came out back in 2010, and it was my introduction to your guys' music and sound. I was actually it was last Monday, so it was literally a Monday night in June is when I heard that track. It was somebody named KitTick_art was the profile. So shout out to them. I found they made a little edit with your song on TikTok, and it was just the immediate chorus of that track was just like it kind of struck a chord with me. It was not only because of the irony of the timing, but it was just like it had this beautiful sound to it that was very catchy and it felt vibrant. And now that I think when I just checked the other day, that video has over 500,000 views already. So how does it kind of feel from your perspective having that song come out, almost, I guess, 14 years ago now, and then seeing it kind of become revitalized on a platform like TikTok? I kind of wanted to ask, I guess it's like a two-sided question. I wanted to first ask, like, what was the process of the initial creation of that song like? And then how does it feel now, kind of seeing that song kind of gaining some new light and having people listen and finding out about your group for the first time?
Yeah, a great pair of questions there, and I can see how I'm just gonna try and do them one by one here. It's
Oh,
a great way of, it's like a great lens through which to see Stornoway as a project, because it if we go back 15 years to when that track, I mean, maybe it's 18 years almost, because that song was not only on the first album, but 5 years before the first album, it was on like our very first set lists when we were gigging around tiny pub venues in Oxford in the UK. And it was written in a summer where you had these late evenings, and in June, because it's the midsummer month in the northern hemisphere, the light stays up, and yet nature around us kind of goes quiet, so you get these beautiful still quiet evenings. And Brian, who's our chief songwriter, would have written that in a period where he was studying ducks, so his PhD was in duck populations, and he was monitoring duck populations like 40 miles down the road in London, and he was having to drive back every evening. It was an exhausting time for him, but he wrote Watching Birds and then our other single, Zorbing, around the same time. And the inspiration of that midsummer, hot summer in probably 2005, the rhythms come from, I think, the kind of country songs that we were all listening to at the time. That film Walk the Line with Johnny Cash, that had
yes,
come
yeah.
out, and we were totally kind of vibing on that and wanted to do a song like that. But we wanted to bring it back into singing about nature, because that's what inspires everything we do. And then it found its way onto our first album. Um, the the reaction to it at the time was, the album charted unexpectedly well. We were in the top 40, which is like dreams come true territory for us. We'd never set out to do music professionally, so getting a top 40 album was a big deal for us. And then over several years, things changed, like technology kicked in, so that you had these recommender systems like YouTube and TikTok, which back 15 years ago, they had no way of telling people everywhere, listen to this track on Monday nights in June because it mentions it in the lyrics. Or, any other song, you could think of a reason why that song's appropriate to that day. In Oxford, we have a tradition on the May the 1st where certain folk and pagan songs are listened to on May the 1st. And YouTube could, in theory, I guess, recommend people to listen to those songs on the May the 1st because of the connection culturally to that date. But in the past 2, 3 years, I've noticed these recommender systems have become extremely advanced, and technology has changed such that a band who were around before even MySpace for bands was a thing.
Mhm.
We watched MySpace come in and decline. We watched Facebook band pages become the main means of marketing to fans, and then they've sort of faded away as more instantaneous marketing has come in, like Instagram and TikTok. And now I'm in a phase where we have to run all these social media, but it's not even in our power to do that recommending. I couldn't have reached out to you, Royce, and because we didn't have a connection yet, and said, listen to this track. It's the Monday Night in June track. I had to leave it up to the black box algorithm to do that. And I noticed that along with yourself, many people were commenting on that video 1 week ago today, saying, "Hey, it's Monday Night in June, and I've never heard this band before, but I just heard this track." And it can't be coincidence that they've all landed on that kind of obscure track. Like, why that track? Why us? Um, so I think there's something going on that is helping people connect to the music that they need to connect to. And as a kind of technologist, I find this really, really interesting. and satisfying. But I know a lot of artists are less kind of entertained by that and maybe a bit more scared by it because we don't know understand how these recommendings are happening. Um, but I think, given that it's led to us having a conversation and getting to know each other over the past week and connecting over this chance event, I think all in all, these recommendations are for the good.
No, really well said. Yes. No, it's yeah, to the point you just made. Yeah, it is very like it is a turn of fate almost how uh something as simple as how the algorithm works can just fit a song so perfectly into the literal time frame that the song is written around. And so yeah, and also I also did I was looking through the comments and a lot of people were mentioning that too. Another point you made when you were talking in regards to how people like have been perceiving the music and stuff. The evolution of your sound has changed a little bit, I would say, over the last couple records from that first initial record until your record you came out with, I believe it was last year. In that transitioning period, how has it felt creatively changing your sound? Obviously, at heart, like you've mentioned, you're um, a folk group, but you've obviously since then your sound has kind of altered. There's been some changes that have, I would say, have benefited it in a way as it's evolved. Could you maybe kind of speak to that point of that transition of, these albums from and all the years that you've been making them, including your hiatus you had, your farewell, and then kind of coming back into it? Like, does it feel fresh and kind of new for you and the band in a way?
Yeah, every song, every performance, every live performance feels new and different somehow. There's even a particular fan who we must have played for them privately at their home maybe 8 times now, and I mention them because it's them that saw us through the hiatus. They kind of predicted the future, and they said, "We think you guys are going to get back together one day. Um, just until that happens, why don't you come and play our summer party every year? And we'll just hang out as friends, no pressure, but it'll be a way of keeping your fingers exercised and warm and keep the muscle memory in there so that when you do get back together, you'll be ready." And we were at the time thinking, no, we're not getting on very well. We don't really anticipate forming a band again, but we'll come and play for you as a favor. And then they kept us coming back a year after year. And it's thanks to them that we were ready to get back together when our hearts told us we needed to get back together. It didn't take very much work to recall the songs and get going. But I mention them because having played with the same people in the same room on pretty much the same date every year for like 8 years, yet every time was different. So yeah, every record, every song, every time we see people, even though they're the same people, there's like a constant novelty in Stornoway. And I've been in lots of other groups and done a lot of other kind of projects, and this is the magic one that brings me that novelty every time. I don't know what it is about Brian's spectacular songwriting or John's really wicked instrumentation that he arranges around everything. I get a lot of satisfaction about from being able to kind of um, improvise a lot of the bass parts in between the parts that we've agreed are like consistent, but there's a lot of freedom to make each performance different by improvising, and that maybe brings forward the novelty as well. Whereas, many other projects I've been in, there's a bit too much organizational like routine or something. In Stornoway, we really love to keep things exciting, not just for us, but also for the audience. So hopefully, if you ask that question to anyone who's been to our shows, they'd also say, yeah, they make it different every time. And one last thing I'll say on that is we're going to Glastonbury Festival in a couple of weeks, and that's like always a dream come true. It's the UK's most famous and magical and strange festival. And even though we've played it 7 times now, and at each of those times we've actually played 3 or 4 gigs across the weekend. This will be the 8th time there. We've come up with some um, stage props, let's say, and
Mhm.
some features in the set that are going to make it different again to everyone. So everybody who's coming to see us will have a totally different taste of Stornoway than they've had before. And I think that's so important for any band, for any musicians to keep things different.
Nice. Well, also, I want to say congratulations to you on being able to go back to Glastonbury. I know it's a huge festival, and it's so exciting to hear what you're saying on how you're, even though you've been so many times over the years, you guys are still trying to bring something new each time you go, something to hopefully the fans that have been with you since day one, they'll be able to resonate with. But then at the same time, people who will, like self, who are just learning about you recently, they'll be able to enjoy that experience in a whole new way because, like we've been talking about, that sound, it's kind of evolving, it's changing, but it's still part of that same whole where it doesn't seem like it's not fitting right in a way. It feels like it's just the right move. So um, I also want to ask about you specifically. I know how you were talking about, you mentioned already how you feel like you have that creative freedom to kind of express yourself, playing the position you do in the band. What would you say for yourself? Is like what are there any like musicians or artists or any kind of like music, film, really anything, literature that inspires you either like in the past or as of late that you would recommend to others, or just something that you really enjoy that kind of keeps that passion you have for this art form going?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess everyone in the band would have a different answer because we're all bringing different influences to this. Something that um, at my deepest roots would be the fact I grew up in Africa, and I bring a kind of usually like a rhythmic complexity and a wackiness, maybe. So there's a lot of very strange, I'd say, unpredictable things that the bass does, especially in relation to the drums. And I've always understood from my bandmates that they value this kind of African rhythm sensibility. To formalize that, the books that I've read recently, which really talk about African rhythm sensibility in a useful way. One's called The Sound of Africa, and it's by Louise Menkes, who is an amazing musicologist. I think she was working at Illinois, University of Illinois Champaign for a while. Um, yeah, that's my deepest roots is my African sensibility. But I also feel that I have to mention nature again because for me and Brian especially, nature conservation and going out into the wide world and hearing birdsong and bringing it back into the music, that's there in every single song, even the slow numbers where maybe rhythm isn't such a component. Um, but most recently, my greatest inspiration every single day is this one book, the Mindful Path to Self-Compassion. It's by a guy called Philip K. Germer, and he studied psychological techniques around self-compassion and meditation and mindfulness. And it seems like a kind of in the UK we would say naff, like a kind of a lame, maybe a lame way to inspire music is through like the I don't know, centering and mindfulness and Zen and total stasis internally. But the more I've studied around the idea that most people are sleepwalking all the time and we need to wake up, and we do that by being mindful. That has enabled so much more of my like musical identity to come forward in just in the last 2 or 3 years since I got into that topic. And it's coincided really nicely with the new album, Dig the Mountain, because into that album, we breathed a whole pandemic's worth of locked down musical inspiration. Nobody was leaving their homes and going out into nature. People were stuck and they needed a way to understand themselves better. And I believe even if we don't all call it the same thing, call it mindfulness, we were all practicing a kind of mindfulness by doing music. And I think in summary, I'd say mindfulness brings us all back to the the rhythm of what we're trying to say. And this is what makes Stornoway kind of a unique folk band, because we're actually about mental health more than anything else, I would say. We've never really said that explicitly, but we're about how humans reconnect to nature and their own mental health by going outside and stop looking at screens and yeah, reconnecting.
Beautifully put. Man, yeah, no, that's amazing. It's so clear to hear those influences you mentioned too and stuff. And it's kind of a beautiful way of being able to take like your roots and really kind of utilizing that in your art, especially now, like you mentioned, post-pandemic, being in a new world, having this new found the appreciation you already had for nature, and I'm sure a lot of people do now that we live after a time where we were kind of not allowed to really have that around. Being able to have that again, there's this newfound sense of, I think, urgency, kind of like it seems like what you're mentioning towards really just getting back into nature again, realizing the importance of what it's like to have it, taking something for granted, I guess, that we just assumed was like, oh, because I can just like go to the park, I can just go on a hike or something like that. And then having that taken away from us, really realizing that very human need, like you're mentioning, to that. And then kind of just wrapping things up, um, other than kind of what you've already mentioned. I mean, I think you've sort of mentioned it, but just for anybody that's like watching, that's like a creative in whatever kind of field that is, whether it's music, writing, acting, painting, you name it, anything like that. For anyone who's kind of still struggling, trying to find where they're at, they might have passions in different areas, but they're really trying to find what they want to do and like what really speaks to them. Is there like any advice you might offer for like younger people trying to get into that space, like where you were may have been at when you started?
Yeah, even when I was on the Scilly Isles last week, I I gave some advice. I took part in an online discussion with young conservationists in Scotland, like kids just coming out of school and wanting to know how to get into a career in conservation, or to at least work out whether a career in conservation was for them, or they should do something else, maybe
Mm-hmm.
creative. And the advice I was giving to them was the it's always really clear to everybody in the room or online, wherever you are, if 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 you are enthusiastic in an honest way about whatever it is that interests you day to day, then they can tell. And
Mm-hmm.
honesty might take the form of writing blog posts or sharing TikTok stories or um, writing songs or maybe being totally invisible, but just being the kind of person who face to face has really genuine conversations. And you might only have those conversations with one or two or five people in a day. Maybe if I'm talking to someone who doesn't naturally go out and socialize very much or doesn't want to be too visible online, then that group doesn't need to be very big, but it can be massive. If you want to blog to the whole world, then why not do that? But whatever your chosen medium and your output is, as long as you have like an honesty about what it is that fascinates and enthuses you, then that career will come and find you. Just
Mm-hmm.
keep from writing or posting or having those conversations. Um, and in our history as a band, I've found that whenever we've kind of strayed from the that honest approach of just having fun making music, when we've tried to make it about something else, like making money from music um, or having some kind of different agenda. Like I once started a whole promotions business, and then years later I realized, hey, I didn't ever want to be in promotions. What I wanted to do was play music, and I realized, but it took me years to realize what I should have just done was keep sitting down with a guitar, keep writing. Um, you learn something from every step you take, whether whatever direction that step is in. So it's fine to go, make mistakes and learn. But the best way to learn is to post and discuss and keep the conversation going with all the people around you. And when you're honest in what kind of things enthuse you and fascinate you, and what your mistakes have been and what you learn from them, that's when the whole world feeds back to you honestly and sends you down the right path. So yeah, I guess in summary, I'm just saying, do what you love, do what you enjoy, and try to do it really honestly, and things will fall into place for sure.
Really well said, man. And then just as we end off with this interview, is there like anything in particular? I know you have your Glastonbury show coming up. Is there anything you would like to, shout out for either the band or anything you got, like any like causes or just like anything you'd like people to know about, just like looking forward in the future for you guys?
Yeah, I think I wanted to mention another festival that we're playing. It's sold out, so it's not that I'm kind of promoting this festival, but I
Mhm.
just think I should mention it because it's going to be of interest, especially because they're about to start off this festival in California, and so it's been a UK for the festival for the past 5 6 years. It's done really well. It's called Love Trails, and it's
Okay.
about not just music and music of all genres. Like they've got EDM, they've got folk, they've got world music, but it's also about endurance running. So it's kind of um, coming out of left field, music and endurance extreme sport. So across that weekend, which is next July 12, 13, 14, some of the audience will be running a 60-mile race
Oh, geez.
whilst at a music festival, which sounds crazy,
Uh-huh.
but they've been doing it successfully for 5 or 6 years and it's sold out. We get to headline the Friday night, and I'm going to be leading a 10 kilometer, I guess that's 7 miles run. And I'm doing both on the same day. So I'm kind of scared to see how it's going to turn out. But I mention it because you're based in California, right? So Love
Yes.
Trails California is starting up sometime later this summer. And I guess it might be that they can reshare this if we mention them, you know. So yeah, check out Love Trails California.
Awesome. Good to hear. Well, yeah, thank you so much for the interview today. I appreciate it, man. It was so good talking to you, and I hope that anyone watching this is hopefully able to, who hasn't already heard about you, can, and hopefully we can use this platform to, bring up a lot of the stuff that you mentioned about conservation and get younger people excited about your guys' music and then just the stuff that you're passionate about as well. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks for reaching out. And yeah, it's now Monday night in June again, so I'm going to go out
Yeah, it
and
literally
tell
is.
people about it. Yeah. So and we'll chat again sometime. Happy to do a second interview sometime.